Ayo, 5-man here. Got my In-N-Out shirt on. Got a different plaid shirt on. Got my awesome hat on. By the way, I found, like, it's weird because every year for Christmas, I have no idea what I want. And so I'm trying to, like, find more practical things. And my now wife has been terrific every Christmas in, like, oh, well, you know, he wants this, but he needs this, but he really wants this. So I'm trying to, like, find things. So I found, like, some work pants, some hats. I even found a site that does, like, better plaid shirts. So I'm hoping to get more of that. So a little bit more diversity. I still don't have plaid underwear or plaid socks. And it was interesting. I was thinking of, like, oh, I'd like to get, like, a plaid, like, because I wear bandanas. And I was like, how come they don't make plaid bandanas? They just have, like, plaid scarves, which don't fit right. Or, like, you know, neckerchiefs or whatever. And she was like, well, are you looking up plaid bandanas? And I was just like, I am not doing that, so I should probably do that. Anyways, neither here nor there. So the long and the short of it is I had 2 interesting conversations today. And I'm going to kind of talk about it. So it's like story time Tuesday. I don't know. That doesn't even make sense, but to me it makes sense. I was working with some people, and it was like the second day I met the guy, but I didn't really talk much to him the first day. And today I was working with him more closely, and just basic conversation about, like, hey, you have a kid? Oh, you have 2 kids? Great, yada, yada. Stuff like that, kind of things his wife does, and, you know, just kind of basic getting to know who you're working with, kind of gauge where they're at. And what was interesting that came about is I smoke cigarettes, and I don't think smoking is good. Matter of fact, it's been a bit of a source of contention with my wife, and only because she knows that I want to quit, okay? So it isn't a source of contention in that, like, I want to continue smoking, and she's like, oh, well, no, I don't want you to continue smoking. So it isn't that. It's I want to quit, and I just haven't yet. Anyways, so whatever. But what I thought was interesting is that's kind of how it initiated, and then it got into, like, pot, and I made like a don't do, and saying, like, doesn't pot, like, make you stupider? And he's like, no, that's a common misconception. And I was like, all right, well, yeah. And he's just like, actually, it doesn't really do that. If it did, I would be, like, so much stupider than I am now, and yada yada yada. So clearly he smokes. And when we went to lunch, we're in his car, and I smelled a thing, and he joking was like, yeah, it smells like old man or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but there's like a hint of something. And granted, I smoke cigarettes, so my nose is kind of jacked anyways and not very great. But yeah, it smelled like weed. Like, he clearly smokes in his car, and I don't really care. I'm not anti people who smoke weed, or anti-weed, or anti-hemp, or anti-CBD. I honestly don't know enough about CBD. I know a little bit about the other 2 things, but I've never smoked weed. And that was one of his questions, was like, well, how come you've never done it? It's just like, because I don't want to. And what I said is that, oh, well, I feel like it, whatever. Then he brought up, like, well, do you drink alcohol? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, well, that's even worse for you. Like, that alcohol can kill people. Weed's never killed anybody. And I've heard this argument before. And again, this is not an anti-weed thing. It's really just story time. But I do want to, like, point out that it's like, okay, well, I don't know what the numbers are on people who drive under the influence of weed who get into car accidents. I don't know what those numbers are. Frankly, I don't even know the numbers of the amount of people who get in car accidents under the influence of pharmaceuticals, like prescribed pharmaceuticals. We don't have those numbers. So before one starts saying, oh, weed's never killed anyone, okay, fine. But I would argue that weed has also not really contributed to anyone's great success. Like, one could say, oh, well, Snoop Dogg is super successful. He smokes all the time. Yeah, Snoop Dogg is a terrific rapper, kind of, I guess. He's very successful. But I would argue that he would be more successful if he had smoked less. Now, granted, it's an unprovable, like, I forget what it's called. It's a straw man argument. So I'm not really trying to make that. And I'm realizing that It's getting darker, so I should probably set up the lights. So anyways, that's the thing. And it's kind of hard to prove, like, how would someone be with or without this thing? Because there's been lots of very successful people who drank a lot, and also probably arguably more successful people who haven't. I mean, Trump is one that comes to mind. He supposedly doesn't drink or smoke at all, but I also think Trump uses pharmaceuticals, so there's that. Somebody who's very successful who doesn't use pharmaceuticals at all. Lights, I'm so sorry. Brightness. See, this is what I usually do before, but there we go. But I had terrific light. It was like the sun was going down, so I didn't bother. Tom Cruise is another person who doesn't use anything, supposedly. So, I mean, I don't know him personally, so if you count exercise and vitamins, I don't know. Anyways, so it quickly went from this like anti or pro pot, which I'm not anti pot again, to this other thing. And it was fascinating. And this is what I really wanted to talk about. I probably talked about this before. Is basically the subject of the day is taxes and or capitalism, to be more specifically, capitalism. And I kind of have this problem where this is the second time I've debated somebody about this issue, where their perception is, oh, capitalism doesn't work. Now, mind you, both of these people are benefactors of capitalism, as in they live in America, they have smartphones, they have, you know, driving technological cars. They're not driving cars from like the 60s or whatever. And they have, 2 kids, and usually, like with this guy, his spouse works at a tech company, so she's making probably 6 figures or whatever, off of capitalism, like literally off of advertising online. Like that's the money that he's making outside of his construction job is through that. And so to me, it's kind of hard to be like, to take someone seriously when they're like, capitalism doesn't work. And I'm like, okay, how do you mean? What do you mean? Because capitalism, like, I can agree that capitalism as it stands now is not ideal, because it has many, many problems. And I would argue that modern capitalism, what we have now in America and other parts of the world, isn't really capitalism. It's called crony capitalism, meaning, oh, it's all about favors, and I do this for you, and it's where the government and the corporations kind of like intermingle and do this thing. So they're arguably inseparable. Like, you can differentiate between my fingers, but they're so tightly knit that it doesn't really matter if you can differentiate. It's like, oh, cool. So there's that. And I just don't agree. I don't agree. Now, I can argue why crony capitalism is not good, but the fundamental thing, if we're just going to break it down, is the pro-regulation. So his perspective, and I talked to my dad about this later too, is this concept of regulation. Like, one hand, it's the extremes of the argument is, one is like no regulation at all, zero, okay? Where it's like, cool, you get up, you want to do a thing, you can do a thing. Now, that effectively is like how the Native Americans operated in America, with some fuzzy wuzziness, but like, that's the understanding, is any person could get up and do whatever they wanted. Now, interestingly enough, even in that grouping, because of how they were designed as a group, how they operated as a group, people still did things. Now, what my dad pointed out, which was a terrific point, is based on the ethics and the morals of the group that you're in, is in direct correlation to how much regulation you need. So with the Native Americans, because their ethics and morals were so high, they needed extremely low regulation. Well, that's fine. I will point out, and there's several reasons why this is, so I'm not just trying to say this is the only reason, but I will point out that the Native Americans had all of North America and all of South America, and the best that they came up with, and I'm going to include the Mayans, the Incans, and the Aztecs in this, the best they could come up with was these massive civilizations that fell on their tush. that regressed into barbarism, cannibalism, hedonism. That was the best that they could accomplish in as known history in 10,000 years. And obviously there's more history behind that, but like in 10,000 years, let's just say that was the best that they got, was like a civilization that peaked and then just totally collapsed. Whereas in that same time, rightly or wrongly, the rest of the world, Africa, the rest of the continent, Africa, Europe, Asia, not so much Australia, but those three continents all like progressed. And it took a long time. And what was notable is that the best amount of human progression happened when America came on the scene. When America declared its independence, like it took 10,000 years for us to develop muskets. And then from muskets to the internet was like less than 200 years. Muskets to putting a man on the moon was 200 years. Because of capitalism. Now, this is my issue, is that people, I think my dad a little bit, and definitely this other guy, would argue that, well, the problem is you need more regulation. Like, there needs to be regulation. And I agree, there needs to be regulation. Because I don't want it to be A-okay for some person to come into my area of my home right now and take a gun and just shoot me in the head or cut off my head with a sword or a knife. Like, I don't want that to be legal. I don't think that's okay. Now, I have the right to defend myself, obviously. But I don't like that that's just legal. I think that the series of events that happens when that's just legal and you can do whatever you want and that's how you can resolve conflict, that is not conducive to a civilized society. On the other end of the spectrum, I also don't like that companies that just care about, hey, we just need to make money. So if we take all this toxic stuff and we just dump it outside, no problemo, as opposed to like properly dealing with it. And that's unethical, that's immoral, that's not acceptable. So the question is, what do you do in a situation? And let's just take the company. What do you do in a civilized society with a company like that where, hey, guys, you need to handle your stuff correctly, right? And they're just like, well, what does correctly mean? And this is where you get into regulation, where it's like, okay, so if it's toxic, if it's this and this and this, you need to handle it in a way that's safe. It needs to be disposed of this way so it doesn't poison people downstream of you, which happened with DuPont. There's an interesting movie about it with Mark Ruffalo, whatever, where they didn't do that, and then they later got sued, and it became a whole thing. And frankly, that type of lawsuit should have shut down DuPont. Everyone at the head of DuPont should have, like, literally, no, sorry, you're a multimillionaire, you're not anymore. Because you were head of a criminal organization who did criminal things, which is kind of my problem. If we get into the real nuts and bolts, is it's not regulation or not, or arguably it's part of that, where you have these corporations who effectively are entities. They are like, Joe, Sam, Bob, Billy, Echinacea, Anastasia, whatever. Echinacea is not a person's name. I hope not. If you are an Echinacea, I'm sorry for you. Anyways, where it's like, oh, whatever company, and we as human beings perceive of them as a separate person. Like Coca-Cola. It's like, oh, well, I like Coca-Cola. Like, they're your friend down the street. It's like, what? What do you mean you like Coca? You mean you like consuming the goods that they make? Fine. But that doesn't, they're not the goods they make. They're not a person. They're a company. They're an entity. Frankly, they are an empty shell that's filled by employees who produce the product. So you can like the product and like the company, as in the people who run the company. Those are two fine things. But we've conflated the two, so it's now become problematic. And generally speaking, in my opinion, I feel like regulation has gone on too much, to the point where the government has proven time and time again they cannot keep up with the technological advances that are going on. Furthermore, they're so filled with holes. So anybody you have in regulation, chances are they can either be bribed or whatever. And who watches the watchers? Like, who regulates the regulators? So if they just go over and they look at this company, DuPont, for instance, and they're like, "Hey, you guys are doing bad things. Okay, well, here's $500,000. Oh, well, never mind. I'll just look the other way." And it's like, what? Now, that's illegal, but the problem is the regulator, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of hypothetical solutions. In my opinion, I think there is value in having things be as minimally regulated as possible. Meaning, like, let's just take speed limits, for instance. Okay, so drive safely. Well, what the heck does drive safely mean? Well, let's say if you're going 50 miles an hour on the freeway, that's not safe. If the surrounding people are going 80 or 90 and you're going 50, that's not safe. You'll get pulled over and you'll get cited, warning, like, hey, you're not driving safely. If you don't feel good driving that, then go on the far right lane. You could have a policy, but you don't need to, like, penalize people. And that's just speed limits. But I feel like this goes across the board, and it really bleeds into one of the most obvious things, which is taxation, where it's like, okay, so wait, hold on. We have the government, which is effectively like a big union that we are a part of. Like, if you're born in this country, you're born into this union. You get a number, and then it's like your social security number, and you're like, cool, yeah, I'm part of this union of USA. Whether I like it or not, that's where I'm at. Don't get me wrong, I like USA. I'm just saying, you don't really get an option if you're born here. And you can come here and join the union, and that's cool. But it's like, okay, fine. So everything I make, I have to be taxed. And what ends up happening right now in America is, unless you're rich, you're getting taxed roughly 50% of everything you make. Every dollar you make, 50% of it will go to the the federal, state, or local government. It will. Whether it's car taxes, parking tickets, or it's income tax, it will go to them. Now, if you're rich, I would argue that maybe 25% or even less of what you make, because of how it's all rigged and how it's set up. And it's not because they're smarter than you. It's because they have more money and because they can afford to pay people to work the system. Now, reversely, if you did it so it's like, no, less regulation. Let's get rid of all this BS IRS laws and rules and regulations, and instead made it something like, oh, hey, yeah, so you're going to buy a hamburger. Great. The hamburger is $5, and we're going to charge you 10%. So we're charging you $5.50. Where does the 10% go? Well, 7 of it goes to federal, 3 of it goes to state, and then state gives 1% of that to, or whatever, 1% goes to local, and that's how it breaks down. So it's $5.50 for a hamburger, and you're like, okay, I want 10 hamburgers. Great. Boom. That's what it costs. As opposed to, you have all this other stuff, which are all regulations, like, you need to pay your employees this much. You need to do this. You need to do that. You need to do that. And it's all under the guise of helping people. But if you actually think about it, it helps no one. Like, think about it. Look at your paycheck that you get, and you're like, whoa, I made $800 or $1,000, and like, you made $1,000 and then you only made like $750 that week in actual your money, right? And then, like, oh, there's your house payment or your apartment, and you're like, well, if you look at the breakdown, you're like, wait, how much of this is tax? That's harder to find out, but you can find out. And then everything else, you buy non-essential items, like, oh, I'm going to buy liquor or a pack of smokes, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And then, like, look at the tax, and you're like, whoa, like, I'm in Cali, and it's like 9, it's basically almost 10%, or maybe it is over 10, I don't know, whatever. And that's just the sales tax. So we're getting taxed on the sales tax in California, tax on the sales tax, tax on my income, tax on every paycheck I make, tax. Plus, anybody I work for, they're also paying taxes to the government. And yet, they consistently do not do what they say they're going to do. And those are the same people, when people are like, we need more regulation, Those are the same people that you've been giving millions or billions or trillions of dollars. California state is a good example. And they have successfully failed at every goal that they've set for themselves. Is there still a homeless population? Yes, it's getting worse every single year. Did they build a high-speed rail between LA and San Francisco? No, they didn't. They're actually so behind financially. We're in the billions of dollars spent and still not even close to completion. There's still a housing crisis in California? Yeah, literally, like, I can take a piece of crap house that's worth like almost $500,000, 500,000, take that 500K and buy a mansion with not only 4 or 5 times the amount of space on the property, but the actual house itself is 4 or 5 times bigger and better, nicer, and newer. Or I can get a POS house in LA. This is because of regulation. So this is a regulation rant. This is a regulation rant. It's a corporation rant. This is a governmental rant. Like, not okay. And it upsets me so much when you get people who are extremely intelligent. They're very knowledgeable. And I've run into this many a times over. They're probably smarter than me and even more versed on some of these things than me. And yet they insist on what we need is more of the same. And they don't say it that way. They're not like, but it's like, oh, no, but we need more regulation. That's the problem. Or, oh, we need more money. That's the problem. And it's like, no, that is not the problem. You know what? We've tried that. We've tried it 10 times out of 10 times. Given more money, had more regulations, done more of this, done more of that. And it has not worked at all. So if it doesn't work, stop doing it. Regress. Go backwards as far as your regulations and all these other things. And start letting, in California, stop making it so darn hard to build a house. And hey, what'll happen is people will come in and build houses. They'll buy properties and they'll build houses. And then suddenly you won't have a housing problem. And suddenly people in California, you know, they can whatever. Stop insisting that minimum wage is the way to go. It's like, no, let them sort it out. Well, but then slave labor will happen. It's like, well, no, it won't. And if it does, you know what? These people have the right to ask for a better wage. And if they can't get a better wage, they should go somewhere else. Oh, but they can't get it because they can only do this. Well, learn something else. Learn something else. It is not the government's job. It is not everyone else's job to like ensure that you can have a good living. It's like, no, it is important to survive as a human being, to get better, If you are not getting better as a person, in a relationship, as a society, as a planet, if you are not aspiring to be better than you were the day before, the year before, the decade before, if you're not trying to be better, then you're regressing, okay? Because there's no stale, there's no this, there's no flat line. Flat line is death, literally death, okay? So either you're going towards death, down, or you're going up, away from death, up. That's the basics of it. I challenge you to find a different instance of that. Please tell me anything you can ever think of. Please put in the comments like, oh, hey, you know what? This stays the same. Please. Okay, so this has been way longer of a rant than what I intended to. I love you all. I'm probably going to do more rants like this or just a fun movie review tomorrow. We'll see. Love you all. Plaid Man out. Bye.